of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people? And they made his grave with the wicked, and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death. And he was numbered with the transgressors, yet he bore the sin of many and makes intercession for the transgressors. Once more for emphasis, verse 5, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace. And with his wounds, we are healed. I want to title today's message, God's Rescue Mission. God's Rescue Mission. The American Coast Guard is made up of over 57,000 active duty, reserve, and civilian members. This 57,000, only 300 the privilege of being members of the helicopter rescue swimmer team. They are the people who show up and rescue others from watery graves in the ocean. When storms shut down entire ports, they go out. When hurricanes ground the United States Navy, they go out. And when the Holy Lord himself reaches down from heaven and destroys his good work with winds that rip houses from the ground, they go out. This job is so dangerous and the training so rigorous that over 85% of hopeful candidates drop out before graduation. Those who by miracle actually have what it takes to become rescue swimmers, possibly dying slow, cold, and alone somewhere in the vast sea. However, they also get the chance to save lives. There is no greater calling in the world than that. While it may not seem like it, the verses I just read tell us of another kind of rescue swimmer. This swimmer, identified as God's servant, started his mission before America had a Coast Guard. He doesn't fly in a helicopter, and he doesn't dive into the raging water of Earth's oceans. This servant, this rescue swimmer, started his mission in heaven. He dove into the sea of our sins. God sent this promise to an actively rebellious Israel that was headed into captivity. They were headed into physical captivity, but God wanted them to know that they weren't. Was sending a servant named And on the heels of the news of this servant Cyrus who would free them physically came 4 servant songs about a new unnamed servant who would liberate people. More about this picture of God's servant and his rescue. It tells us that God redeemed the nation as the substitute for sinners. We live so far after Isaiah and the people he wrote this to that what was future hope for them is now historical truth for us. The servant God promised in this text has already showed up, and his name is Jesus. So this song is a gospel song. But it's an ugly song. It's a scandalous, sent to suffer and die for people who don't deserve it. Suffer and die for people who don't deserve it. I've never heard anyone sing the words of this text. I've never heard anyone sing the words of this text. And I believe that's because it confronts us with the ugly. And I believe that's because it confronts us with the ugly truth that because we are sinners, God has the right to judge and destroy us. This song, however, is that God, in his kindness, decided to send Jesus to suffer. The heart of this passage and this sermon is simple. Jesus completed God's rescue mission by accepting our punishment and sharing his righteousness. That's the point God sent me to share this morning. Let me say it again. Jesus completed God's rescue mission, punishment, and sharing his righteousness. And I pray that this sermon encourages believers to appreciate anew what Jesus did. And I pray that it encourages time in what Jesus did. The question before us today is, according to Isaiah, what were the details of God's rescue mission? First detail we see in chapter 52, verses 13 through 15, and this detail is that Jesus established God's covenant with the world. He established God's covenant with the world. The song opens with a preview of the servant's ministry, that he would live wisely and be exalted. Verse 13 says the servant would be high and lifted up. That's the same description Isaiah gave for when he saw the Lord in chapter 6. This is God through Isaiah telling us that God was sending God on a rescue mission. The Jews were shocked when Jesus called God his Father or made I am statements, but a divine servant sent to save humanity was the plan all along. Not only is Jesus God's servant, he's God in the flesh, and he's exalted